Hello, welcome to Buffalo Kwanzaa Virtual 2020 with my sis, Fragrance of Yah.
Abarigani to everyone who has tuned in today. The response should be Imani Habarigani. For the last day of Kwanzaa, Imani in Kiswahili means faith. In Dr. Malana Karenga's book called Kwanzaa, a celebration of family, community, and culture, it is defined with these words: faith, to believe with all your heart in our people, our parents, and our teachers, our leaders, and the righteousness and victory of our struggle. In this day and time, amid the upheaval and the protests that we have seen for social justice, the last part that says, belief in the righteousness and victory of our struggle has a great significance today in 2020, going into 2021. First of all, before I continue, I would like to thank the Kwanzaa Committee for once again inviting me to speak on the last day of Kwanzaa. It has been several years that I have done this. It's beginning to be a tradition. Many in the audience know that I have spent more than 40 years teaching, writing, researching, and documenting our history as African people. My newspaper column, Eye on History, will be 42 years old in this coming February. You can read my column weekly in the Criterion newspaper, which is now 95 years old. The Criterion is the oldest black newspaper in Western New York, published weekly by the distinguished Meriwether family. The column Eye on History began in 1979 in the Challenger newspaper. Special thanks to Sister Elnisa Banks for her support of the column. The theme of Kwanzaa this year is reframing the legacy of Mother Africa. The term reframing is generally defined as developing a new outlook and putting a situation into another frame which follows the facts and evidence to change the definition. When you reframe something, you can produce change in a person's outlook and perspective. History teaches us that our homeland, Mother Africa, has always, in past years and still today, put in a negative light, especially by European historians and scholars. When I was a student in elementary school and high school, Africa was referred to as the Dark Continent, a place with no history where people were running around like savages. Many people in the audience, if you are a senior citizen like I am, you will remember the old television shows like Rumble of the Jungle or the old Tarzan movies that showed Africans as wild and savage. Those images existed in films for many, many years. And many people, even some African Americans in this country, believe those negative images of Africa as being the dark continent. So I have spent close to 42 years of my life changing that image, putting Africa back in its proper perspective, putting it back in the proper frame. It's like reframing a picture, adjusting it, straightening it out, making sure that everything in the picture is in the correct order. I wrote this book, Eye on History, in 1989. This book is 31 years old. I wrote it to change the negative images of Africa, to redefine the the history of Africa and what it means, what it really means. I'll just read you very quickly some of the titles in Africa in this book. The called Ion History. The Mandingo King of West Africa, the Kingdom and the Horse, the El Dorado of Africa. El Dorado, and again, the seniors will remember there used to be a car called the El Dorado. It was a Cadillac. It was like the top of the line. So El Dorado refers to gold and riches. The Black Knights of Africa, the City of the Scholar, Timbuktu, the Land of Burnt Faces, which the Greeks called Athiops, Ethiopia, the Land of Burnt Faces, Black Egypt, To Lay a Foundation by the great author J.A. Rogers, Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, The Sphinx, From Africa to Spain, in 5 chapters, From Africa to Spain, and how the Moors were the ones who brought civilization. 700 years they spent in Spain, and so on. So this book is filled with so much history, so much African history. The other thing that I would like to note also is that there is so much history that we do not know. But you know, we can do many things to learn our history, even if we do not know it. One of my favorite books is called You Can't Teach What You Don't Know. You must learn about Mother Africa and share what you learn. Reflect on its tradition. And there's an excellent section in this book by Dr. Malana Karenga, where he speaks of Africa and the continental roots of Kwanzaa. So I'm just going to read just a little bit of the book, the section here, written by Dr. Malana Karenga. Kwanzaa is based on the first fruit celebration. The first fruit celebrations are recorded in African history as far back as ancient Egypt and Nubia, and appear in many African civilizations such as Ashanti land and Yoruba land. These celebrations are also found in ancient and modern times among societies as large as the Zulu or kingdoms of Swaziland, or smaller society and other groups throughout all of southeastern Africa. That's why I recommend those of us who celebrate Kwanzaa, I recommend that you read the book from the master himself, from the creator, called Kwanzaa, A Celebration of Family, Community, and Culture. Today, I feel very strongly that we really should not have any excuses for a lack of knowledge about Mother Africa. In my day growing up, we didn't have a lot of resources. We didn't have a lot of materials. The textbooks, the one thing I remember, and I can close my eyes and I can see it now, in my 5th grade history book, the only picture of African black people they were in the cotton field picking cotton. There was no mention of Africa or anything along those lines. But we have these resources today. And here in Buffalo, there may be some people watching this who may not live in our city, but I wanted to point this out. Here in Buffalo, we have a very important library. I'm looking at it now right across the street from where I'm sitting. It's the Frank E. Merriweather Library, which is the center of research, books, films, and other materials on African history. And although due to COVID, it's closed to the public, but I understand it's going to be opening back up soon. But even so, there's curbside pickup on any book that you want to read. All you have to do is call, give the name of the book, tell them when you're coming, and you can come and pick it up. Also, there's a website, the library has that has numerous information on topics in African history. We have had so many scholars who have written so much on the history of Africa, putting it back, reframing the continent. Scholars such as Dr. Asa G. Hilliard, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. John Henry Clark, Dr. Malife Asante, the great J.A. Rogers, Arthur Schomburg, Dr. Ben, Amos Wilson, Dr. Anthony T. Browder, Dr. Leroy Vaughn, and Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, whose experiments provided proof that the ancient Egyptians were indeed black. I have so many books, I have hundreds of books. I guess you can say I've got a library of my own. But another of my favorite books is this one, called Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, written by Dr. Anthony T. Browder. He's also wrote a book called From the Browder File. And what I'd like to do is just read part of the introduction to this book from Dr. John Henry Clark. And I thought I would have everything together, and the best laid plans, is what I'm saying. But I'll go on to another section here on Imhotep. Many people have read or studied that it was Hippocrates who was the first doctor, the first physician. But in this book, Dr. Anthony T. Browder points out the fact that it was an African named Imhotep, the earliest known physician. He was a minister of state, a scribe, a seer, an architect, an astronomer, and a physician. He was deified under the 18th dynasty, and a temple was erected in his honor. So Imhotep, so many of our young people go through medical school, and they take the Hippocratic Oath, and they learn nothing about the great Imhotep. I have invited a lot of leaders to Buffalo over the years, and once I invited a gentleman from Chicago. He's known as the math doctor, and he came to Buffalo and he talked about the greatness of black mathematicians. His name was Dr. Shaheed Muhammad. I invited him to Buffalo twice, and he spoke at the Meriwether Library. And one point he made is that our young people are never taught about the great scientists and the great African mathematicians, people such as Benjamin Banneker. They don't get that information. So he always starts his lecture by giving information and credit to those mathematicians that have been in our history. So I'm hoping that you will read a copy of this book. Also, the Dogon people of West Africa. They are in this book called Black People and Their Place in World History. And I just there's a lot of interest nowadays in the space program and so on, but I just want to read a little bit here about the Dogon people. The Dogon people gave names and a complete description of the properties and the behavior of the planets, the moons, and the fixed stars, such as Polaris, Sirius. They created a calendar based on the 6 positions or phases of Venus. This is determined by the Dogon people. And they would plant and harvest their food accordingly to the calendar that they developed. Many modern scientists, they know about the Dogon people, but they have not revealed that information. The Dogon people also knew about Sirius B, an invisible star to the naked eye, located 57 trillion miles away. The Frenchmen were told that Sirius B is in the sky, the tiniest of stars, and yet the heaviest star, and it's the brightest star in the sky. So they have taught astronomy for many, many, many years, and scientists cannot figure out how they are able to determine all of this information about the planets and the stars and the galaxies. This is recorded in this book called Black People and Their Place in World History. Another section in the book is the one on the African warrior queen Nzinga. Nzinga lived from 1582 to 1663, and she was queen of what is now called Angola in 1623, and she dedicated her entire life to fighting the Portuguese to prevent the enslavement of her people. So when people talk to me and we're talking about enslavement, and a lot of people bring up, well, African people enslaved their own folks. Yes, some of them did. But we don't hear about the other people who did not do it. People such as Nzinga and the others, who fought the Portuguese for 40 years to keep her people from being enslaved. She proved to be a cunning rival to the Portuguese. She was famous for her intelligence and her bravery and her brilliant military strategies, which were used for centuries during struggles for independence throughout Africa. And there's more about her in the book and so many other. It's not only African history, but there's a lot of African American history in here. And it's really worthwhile for people. And this book is not easy to find. Many of the books I have, you have to really search for them. Some of them are out of print, and if you do find them, they are very, very expensive. So I encourage people to do the research, find out where these books are. I know here in one of the problems I had in doing this writing, and I've written more than 4,000 articles in African and African American history in the last 40 plus years. That's a lot of articles. But when I first started writing the articles, the problem I had was finding the books. Or when I did find the books, they were not available. You could not take them out of the library. The Central Library, and I'm sure in other cities around the country, had a room called the stack room. And in the stack room, many of the books were written in the 1800s and early 1900s, and these books did not circulate. You couldn't take them out of the library. You had to sit in the library in order to read and study the books. There's another room called the rare book room. And in order for you to use the books in the rare book room, you have to make an appointment. You have to show a form of identification. Most people show their driver's license. And then while you're in the room, somebody is sitting across the desk from you while you're studying the books. So I have used the rare book room. I have used books in the stack room. There was a series of periodicals or magazines that were written in the 1930s and 40s called the Negro History Bulletin. That is very hard to find. They have some copies, and I think if you were to Google the Negro History Bulletin, you might be able to get some copies, but they are not easy to find. When you're doing this work, you have to be determined. You have to have a lot of patience. You can't give up. There was a couple of times where I wanted to borrow a book, and I had to get special permission from the librarians to do it because the book was massive, and there's no way I could sit and go through all that entire book for the time that I had. Another book that I think you find interesting called Lies My Teacher Told Me. This book has so much information, and it specifically identifies information that is not in your school textbooks. We have a great deal of work to do in all of our schools, not just here where I am in Buffalo, New York, which I have fought that battle for a long time, to do something about upgrading our textbooks so that they have the correct information. I've had people say to me, well, don't worry about the textbooks. We can go to the library and we can teach our children. And I go back to what I said earlier. You can't teach what you don't know. And my problem, when I was teaching, I spent 30 years teaching in the Buffalo Public Schools. And I was known for two things: teaching African American history all year long from September to June, and being successful with at-risk students, especially black male students. And I taught fifth grade for a long time, and I never will forget that whenever there was a student that nobody else could handle, guess whose room that student ended up in? Mrs. Doyle's room. Because the principals knew that they could depend on me to do something with the child that another teacher could not do. I always had the opinion that all teachers should need to be trained effectively on how to teach our children, because the majority of the teachers in the school system are not African American. That's another battle that we have to fight, to get more of our teachers in there. And just because you're an African American teacher does not mean that you know the history either. You have to be trained. You have to have the right materials, which led me to do something that had never been done in the history of the Buffalo Public Schools. I established the first and only African American Resource Center. If you walked into that room, you would think you were in a museum. It was wall to wall Black history. And the goal was to provide information, materials, and resources to the teachers so they could teach this history properly. I'm going to be winding up in just a few minutes, but I wanted to suggest a film. This is a film called Serafina. It's a good film. If you have not seen it, I hope you will take it and order it, Google it, Serafina. This is a tribute to the children of Soweto in South Africa, who rose up and fought and resisted apartheid and its brutal regime. I recommend this very important film for you and your family. They fought against the brutal government. And in 1976, the South African government declared a state of emergency. For the next 13 years, the children of Soweto fought in the spirit of Nelson Mandela against the oppression and the brutality of the government. Over 750 African children were killed, shot down in the street. 10,000 were arrested, tortured, and assaulted by the white police. The children not only fought against the brutality of this government, but they also fought against the inferior education and the attempts to destroy their history and their own traditions. It's rated PG-13 because it has scenes of violence, but you have to remember, the children of Soweto live under this violence and brutality every day. I hope you will get the film. In conclusion, I'm going to quote something in my book, Eye on History. And the chapter I'm going to quote from is called The Significance of History. And I'm just going to read a paragraph. The following represents several reasons why we should continue to advance the study of history. To destroy the myth that Africa was a continent without history. It has been proven that all civilization began on the continent of Africa. To help place Africa in its proper historical perspective. To give our young people today an understanding of the culture and the people of Africa. To strengthen the ties between the African Americans in this country and those people in Africa. To help develop a positive self-image in our students today through a presentation of their cultural heritage. To encourage our students to think, to understand, and to evaluate the actions of nations and men. History can serve as the vehicle to accomplish this and perhaps answer the question of where we are going today. So reframing Mother Africa, it's up to us. Those of us who know, and there are a lot of us who know, must not only write about it, they must share what they know. That has been my goal, that has been my mission. Not only to gather this knowledge, but what good is it for me to have all these books and all this knowledge and I'm not sharing it with the community, the whole community, so that everybody knows. If you can write, then write. If you can lecture, then lecture. If you're a poet, write poems of Mother Africa. If you sing songs of Mother Africa. But whatever you do, remember, we all have a responsibility to reframe the legacy of Mother Africa. Thank you very much, Asante Sami. This is Dr. Eva Doyle signing off.
The word Kwanzaa means first fruit.
I hope you got it right, everyone.
And if you got all the questions wrong, I do not know what's wrong with you.
Obviously, you've never been to Kwanzaa.
Yes. And you haven't been to third grade at all.
Happy Kwanzaa! Joyous Kwanzaa.
I do not know.